So a friend of mine, Amina, reposted a little meme today that I thought was interesting, and I agreed with, and it was, owning less is better than organizing more. Owning less is better than organizing more. And the point is just like, how about instead of trying to organize all your shit, you just like get rid of stuff and minimize, right? I think it was posted originally by somebody that posted up about minimalism. Totally into minimalism. Less now than I used to be, however. I lived my life as an expression of minimalism. I lived for 3 years out of a backpack, and that backpack started off being huge, getting smaller and smaller, to the point where after a few years I was doing these trips when I settled in London, which I was calling ultra cheap but ultra light. And I literally would go away for like 4 days to Austria or to the Norway, and I'd only bring what I could have in my pockets. So I'd be like, how minimalist can I be? I gave away so much of my stuff. I packed up, got rid of so much stuff. So I lived for years with extreme physical minimalism, and I do think that's a path to peace, to happiness. You're realizing you don't need those things. Simplicity is bliss, right? And where I'm at now is like, there's a lot more stuff in my world. I've got kids, but also just my own stuff. I'm happy having stuff again. But it's not a return. It's more like a spiral. And so there's a way of having stuff in your world, physical stuff, without actually having the cognitive impact of complexity of having lots of things in your world. And really it comes down to a new relationship to ownership, right? There's the idea of ownership itself is an idea that's based on control. It's actually illusory. It's never attainable. You can never actually own something because you can never actually have total control. You might have title on an object, like I have title on my car or title on the properties that I own, but that's like, so does that mean I own it? Well, yes, until the bank takes it or until the government takes it, because taxes aren't paid. So who really owns it? The government owns it. Well, yeah, until another country storms in and now they own it. So like, ownership is a facade. It's bullshit. It's like, it's not, there's not that it's not, can't be useful. I mean, we agree that something is owned, that serves a certain function, but when we start to believe that it's true, you actually become a victim. And so this is what I call the victimhood of ownership. It's impossible to believe that you own something without being owned by it. That is the victimhood that comes with ownership. And so it's a catch-22. And so the way to be free from that is to either in the material physical world to not have that situation by physically removing things from your life, like selling the house, getting rid of the stuff. That's the external manifestation of not owning. But that can also be created internally by holding in mind a relationship to things, which is one where you don't own them. So even if you have a house full of stuff, like I know that if this house burned down, like I know that I'd be at peace, I'd be okay. How do I know that? Because I've given everything away before and I've found the bliss in that. Physically, I've gone through the physical journey, which is really about taking you on a psychological journey. That's what Joseph Campbell used to go on and on about. It's like going on an adventure physically in the world develops the psychological experience that takes you on that journey internally. So the external serves a function of generating the internal. So if you've never given away stuff and you've never physically simplified, minimized, then I would highly recommend doing it. But it's doing it as a literal, as a ritual, as an enactment of the internal shift and experience. So once you've been able to create that internal freedom from ownership, where there is no longer a relationship to things, where owning them is what gives you a sense of safety or control, but that just them being in your world is useful and they don't need to be. I remember once I was robbed when I was living in a van in Prague. They took, I don't know, $5,000 worth of stuff. I'd left it in my car, which I didn't usually do in the van, but camera, laptop, these kinds of things. I don't remember exactly, but it was a pretty good chunk of change, iPod. And I was like, all right, whatever. There wasn't like a moment of like pang, and it was just a bit of sadness for whoever stole it, needed it more than I did. But that's because I didn't have the connection to it that I may have had 5 or 10 years prior. By that time, I'd already given so much away, and I'd really transformed my relationship to stuff and owning things. And this is also really relevant to the work I'm doing right now with Richard Eyre, who wrote The Happiness Paradox, or also titled The Happiness Paradigm. 2 titles, 1 book, depending on which side you're looking at. And one of the concepts in there is that ownership is one of three things you say that's pursued for happiness, but it's actually a lie. That it will never give you happiness because it's actually unattainable. And he presents the alternative of stewardship. So instead of having the aspiration to own things, you aspire instead to steward. And I found a lot of even greater bliss and growth recently in this year, in working with Richard, in moving my outcome from one of ownership to ownership in the sense of to make a certain amount of money so that I can have that and own that and have that control, to one of stewardship, which is a movement from the future, of control in the future, to the present tense. What can I do? How can I serve this moment? How can I create right now? So there's a number of ways to transcend ownership as a phenomenology, as an experience. And I think all of those, when transcending it, bring greater peace, more joy, more happiness. And then you get to have stuff again without it being a problem. And that's my story, Morning Glory. Thank you for being here. This is Rumi. He's like totally chilling, not worried about owning anything. I love you for listening. If you're not subscribed to my channel, do it. If you're on Facebook, follow. Thanks for being here. Much love, guys.